Killer's Day. The goddess of medicine and healing. The lady of divine salvation, mercy, and hangovers. The patient goddess. The identity of Duktra Bradoon had been a long-term cover, but for some reason that had been part of the contract, along with the specifications that 1. She live a lifestyle entirely consistent with that identity for several months before executing the targets, and 2. That nothing, absolutely nothing, was communicated until the job was done, and 3. She only messaged from a burner Omnipad. It promised to be an excessively long-term cover, but the amount on the first credit stick showed her client possessed the necessary money to make it all worthwhile. Beyond that, she appreciated her client's desire to ensure the work was done right. While the end goal remained the same, assassination had certain distinctions from murder, notably that the clients wanted no trace of their handiwork and had the money to distance themselves from their victims. That did not always translate into caution or patience. Despite any overt motives, it usually came down to an act of passion. This client had restraint, and Duktra appreciated that fact. It gave her time to study her targets, and also their protection. Given the size of the payoff, she had no doubt that her client was part of the Imperial family, and she proceeded with caution. Even a few cursory rumours about Lorem Raylin were enough to convince, and she stayed resolutely off of her Omnipad. With a wealth of time on her hands, the former Marine turned assassin weighed her options before trotting out the identity of Duktra Bradoon. Difficult to come by and expensive, falsified IDs were dangerous things, best used sparingly until there was a digital trail. Once there was some history behind Duktra, that was another matter. The more normal there was to see, the less people looked, and with an eye to creating a valid persona, she embarked on the familiar role of killing things for money. As a pest control specialist, her company was not readily sought out, a feature only embellished by adopting an especially abrasive persona. While her clinical condition as a sociopath had quickly resulted in her expulsion from the Marines, she had no propensity to be rude or insulting. Such behaviour tended to be detrimental to getting what she wanted from others, and was best avoided as a rule. Renting the industrial shop where she slept, and billing herself as a specialist in exotic fauna, had been the first step in maintaining her cover. The ramshackle establishment was in an area with mediocre security, and she scrupulously paid the rent on time. Given the size of the Imperium, there were endless pest problems from planet to planet, and no one could easily question any claims of expertise. With actual business being optional, she settled in to study her cover, using the opportunity to hone her craft by exploring the world of poisons. But when the Pouchadillo pet craze came crashing down, she knew she had found her niche. Work as an exterminator was sketchy at best, being devoid of regular office hours. After settling in for several weeks, she began making curious forays into tracking her targets. The movements of a 3-year-old child were essentially non-existent, as Prince Laral eschewed public exposure for himself and his daughters. While Princess Camordri was furtive in her movements outside the Northern Palace, they invariably revolved around some debauchery or other before disappearing back home. That the revelries were seldom spoken of was typical. People did not discuss the Imperial family, and Camordri was no exception. Duktra had the impression her trips were more to cultivate favour from the nobles in her company than for personal pleasure. The outings seemed to be expensive, as they were excessive, but nowhere was Camordri mentioned as being inebriated or incapacitated. With her injunction to stay off the datanet, she had turned to cultivating the company of those with insight into that world. Pavis Clips Cosreen had been a gift from the goddess. For obvious reasons, the disaster of a woman had virtually no social circle. Willing to ignore any indignity, Cosreen was addicted to hunting down her given victims with utter tenacity. Save for her lack of hygiene, Duktra considered the woman something of a kindred spirit, though there were limits, and she hit them quickly in Clips's company. Physical fitness was a requirement for her work. While that was decidedly not the case for a freelance video journalist, the prospect of having wasted her time in the woman rankled, as she weaved disastrously between one addiction or another. Still, it had paid off in the end. To say she felt nothing for Camordra's death would be inaccurate. For that woman Tavi, she'd felt nothing at all, but as Smoochie the Hawk snatched the woman under, she had felt a certain personal pride in her work. Patience was a virtue. As for what the Hawk had done to Cosreen, the Hawk had been well endowed, truly one of nature's wonders, and triple homicide by the fish was something of a novelty she could look back on, with a personal sense of accomplishment once she was safely in the Alliance. Her one moment of real concern had not been the deaths of either princess, but a concern about her final payment. It was a sensible precaution to accept a credit voucher from her client in an area with no security cameras. Recorded evidence was a danger to them both, and she appreciated the fact, but assassination was not a vocation where one could complain about being stiffed for her work. Yes, her client had amply paid up front, but the bonus was an ample incentive. She made certain to wear her body armor to the drop, aware of that prospect as well, but the nondescript car had come by right on time, windows darkened. A gloved hand had offered the credit stick out the window, waited while she verified the amount, then moved on without a word spoken. The time spent in preparation had not been wasted. Killing a down-on-her-luck woman of approximately her size, she had stored the vagrant's body in a refrigeration unit, locked in the back of the ship. The contract complete, she called for the final payment before making her exit. Her cover had used several very toxic and flammable chemicals, and anyone who came looking for Duktra Bradoon would only find a charred corpse. Returning to the shop, she spent a few minutes fetching out her new identity. Buzz cut her hair to match the photograph on the ID, and changed into an extra layer of clothing she planned to discard on her way to the spaceport. Bag in hand, she withdrew the colour-matched eyeball and set it in her eye socket, ready to set the shop alight before walking to the nearest autobus terminal, a few miles away. She would have appreciated the planning when the prosthetic eye exploded in her skull, as well as the professionalism of the woman who entered the shop and removed the credit sticks before setting the building alight. Seated around the hotel kitchen over in the twins' room, Desi stared blearily into her tea, but frowned at the direction the conversation was turning. I don't care how scary she is, I am not cutting my bangs again. I just grew them back. Why don't you grow yours out? It was Raylan's suggestion, not mine, Melondi said lightly, as if last night had been completely ordinary. Your super spook with imaginary powers said so. My mother's, Melondi said casually, which didn't help. Anyway, do you know what's worse than imaginary? Desi sensed a trap, but went in anyway. No? Half imaginary. Having crawled around in the bowels of the Imperial Palace with her friend, Desi felt her measure of reality tilting again. What does that mean? Think about it. Melondi shrugged almost imperceptibly as she wolfed down her breakfast. I've never worn my hair with bangs. You could start, Desi pointed out. I could command you, Melondi said casually, pausing before taking another bite. Everyone was moving fast this morning, with the trip to the zoo. As a chance to see Vadim, Melondi was moving faster than most. As your advisor, I would argue against such abuses of power, Desi said primly. Besides, they look good on my face, which means, by the transitive property, they would look good on your face. Melondi paused between bites, caught short. By the transitive property? Who says that? The twins, Desi said, nodding to the pair. Don't drag us into this, replied one of the sisters. For some unfathomable reason, Today appeared to be a matching day, and the Kerbals wore matching blue tops, black leggings, and matching backpacks as they waited by the door.
"But you do say that," Desi persisted. "Well, yes. Professor Zarin says it,"
replied the other girl while her sister nodded.
"It's a perfectly good phrase," finished the first.
"Does Professor Warwick say it?" Melondi raised her eyebrows, looking like she was ready to pounce on an easy win.
"I asked him,"
Desi replied, frowning thoughtfully as she scarfed a bread roll. Losing her dinner the night before had left her with a touchy stomach, but a definite appetite. She didn't like thinking about the whole evening and was happy with a change of subject.
"He couldn't decide if it meant IE or EG."
"IE?" Desala asked, over her cup of tea.
"It's Latin," Desi offered. "Some dead human language." "I thought you were taking English," Lark asked.
She'd arrived early with Letzi in tow, happy to go along to the zoo.
"Isn't that supposed to be your major?"
"It is," Desi says slowly, as she worked through an explanation.
"English gets a little weird. It borrows a lot of words from other human languages. I think I'm getting most of what he says, except when he drops into the non-persistent tense, but when he starts using slang or borrowed words, I get a little lost."
Melondi pursed her lips, not letting go of things. "So you think I'd look good with bangs?"
"Bangs are in style again, according to the fashion pages,"
Lark said firmly. "In style? They're bangs! How could they be in?" Melondi looked to the others as if wrestling with the concept of anyone dictating fashion. "And since when? Who decides these things?"
"Since last night's address,"
Lark shrugged off Melondi's glare, as it was mostly targeted at Desi. "Fine." Melondi huffed once before spewing the last sausage on her plate. "We'll go by the shop and see what kind of product they have for rapid hair growth."
"All the shops on campus are closed during the holiday. We'll have to go out in town."
Letzi spoke up, having gulped down a sausage of her own and reached for a third. Desi watched the way she and Lark tore through their food, and wondered if either of them could cook.
"We can stop on the way to the Dasari's house before we meet up with Nesfa," Desi offered.
The time without seeing Vadim had been getting on Mel's nerves, and while no one was going to say a word about last night, she clearly needed some time with him. Particularly with Solana Dasari prowling around.
"We'll just go 10 minutes early and stop on the way. The McClendons are spending the whole day at the zoo."
That was true enough, though Melondi was having mixed thoughts about leaving Vadim to watch the finals at Orinka Stadium. It would be nice if they could take him along, but it was a family outing. All Mel could do was ask.
"I'm good with that," nodded Letzi. "I love the zoo. Are we all going?" "Mostly."
Desi pointed over at the huddle of blankets laying claim to the couch.
"Sinchiki has something with her family today."
"Sorry we won't have you. Another day, maybe?" Letzi called over to the mound of blankets, which made no reply. Turning back to the others, she briefly arched an eyebrow.
"Anyway, one day is not enough to see the zoo. Goddess, a couple of days is barely enough." They added the New Earth exhibit to the Psychotic Life area. It's supposed to be popular, but my father hasn't wanted to see it," Desi offered, before dialing back her enthusiasm. "All he'll say is, Schulnausers don't count."
"Schulnausers?"
"It's an Earth canid. I had to look it up. I'm not sure he's right."
"Isn't that the wing with the rhino colony?"
"Yeah. Whenever I've asked him to visit, Father only laughs."
There was a lulling conversation as the girls poked at their food.
"Hair product for rapid growth?"
Desi said, finding herself on uncertain ground as the others finished cleaning their plates.
"They have that?"
"Sure. Don't you use Agavashil?"
"That's Rakiri,"
she muttered.
"Sure," said one of the twins, nodding with her sister before her sibling continued. "All of the best hair care products are Rakiri. I mean, go figure, right?"
There was nothing for it. Even with friends, no. Especially with friends, It was embarrassing, but there it was.
It's expensive,
Desi said quietly.
It's not that expensive. You need to stop using that generic gunk. Even Zenshiki doesn't use that.
Mel peered at her, and her expression took on a bit of understanding. Desi loved being accepted, despite her past, but loathed being pitied. Admitting she minded her money was humiliating, but Mel bit her lip thoughtfully before pushing on.
Take some advice, my advisor. Talk to your parents. They're well off now, so by the transitive property, you can afford some things, you know. Besides, if we're going to look more alike, I insist. You know I hate asking for money, Desi sighed.
Yeah, she had funds now, but old habits died hard.
Fine, but you're growing bangs.
My treat then, Mel nodded, but short bangs.
Long bangs are in fashion,
said one of the twins sagely. I still want to know who is responsible for what's in, Blondie said darkly. Not discussing last night was the right thing to do, particularly anything about Mint, but at least talking around the speech and what was going on was important, and Melondi had edged around the topic most of the morning. Desi felt the need to change the subject from responsibilities while her friend was in a mood. Hair. Hair seemed safe, and it was probably a good idea to hammer things out if she was going to look like Melondi on purpose.
Rakiri stuff can actually grow hair?
Desi asked. The others all nodded, which didn't offer much.
Zenshiki, what do you use?
No comment,
muttered the blankets. Despite the early hour, the crowds at the Imperial Zoo hummed with activity, a holiday tapestry of colour and merriment that wrapped the crowd in the joy of Ivrovi. It was a good place to take the McClendon family, and Vadim had been looking forward to the outing, as well as seeing Melondi. He hadn't missed the address the night before, and he was filled with questions he couldn't possibly ask. Among the throngs of people, Vadim navigated the winding pathways, his eyes taking in the sights and sounds of the exotic animals that called the zoo home. It should have been a perfect winter outing, but as their group spread out, he found himself preoccupied with the whispered war of words being exchanged between Solana and Melondi. His initial relief was that Solana seemed to have given up chasing him. That morning she had been polite, at least until Melondi and the others arrived. A good host should always be aware of the temperament of their guests, and Solana's had changed. She was still being polite and sticking with Eli, but after they got to the zoo...
You think you even stand a chance with Vadim? Get real. Everyone can see you're trying to marry up.
In fairness, Solana had started it. He'd frozen in indecision and nearly balked. For a wonder, it had been Eli who came to the rescue, steering Solana away with a few hissed remarks about chilling out. Solana was family, but Melondi was... well, nothing was settled as to just what she was to him, and he understood that, of course. Solana had no idea how outclassed she was, and Vadim breathed a prayer to kill her for Eli's rescue. They visited the rhino colony, of course. The rhino weren't fully sapient, and the morning "Ya" dance was a favourite with visitors. It was winter, and most people flocked to the low-temperature exhibits, featuring a small herd of kahaks from dirt. Everyone marvelled at the ogropores with their long wavering neck tentacles, and laughed at the antics of the inflating grips. Melondi seemed to be enjoying herself, along with the rest of their friends. Only Desi seemed out of sorts, walking around with her winter hoodie pulled down tight. The McClendons and Mr. Warwick had a good laugh as they pondered visiting the psychotic life area of the park. Something called a honey badger had been slated for the petting zoo, but hastily moved to a new enclosure that was secured from the public. Given what he knew about honey, it seemed an odd choice, but the humans didn't disagree. While there was an Earth exhibition, the humans opted to pass on a visit. With far more than anyone could see in a day, it seemed like a good idea if they skipped past what they could see at home. Surrounded by family and friends, he felt relatively safe. It was a wonderful experience, as most of the women passing by looked to the humans, but as he strolled past enclosures housing everything from fearsome Grinshaw to playful Vilyuks, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease whenever Solana looked his way. That she was behaving herself was a relief, but whatever had prompted her change of heart, she wasn't doing it gracefully. Now, as he wandered through the zoo, Vadim couldn't escape the feeling of being under Solana's eye, even if she had given up on trying to get his attention. When she passed near, there weren't always words, but often enough. Vadim felt a terrible pang of guilt for causing the rift between his friends and his family. The older members, Mr. and Mrs. McClendon and the Dasari woman, seemed to be having a good time, oblivious of his discomfort, though he'd noticed Brelak glance his way now and then. Fortunately, it wasn't only Eli who rallied to his defense as the visit wore on. Passing by the exhibit with the towering Vogelsats, he nearly flinched as Solana made another pass, hissing, "You know, decent people might stop to wonder if Vadim is out of their league." Melondi let it roll off her like water off a prolfer, though her lips had puckered a bit. Rather than Eli, this time it was Hannah who leaned in and growled, "You might wonder if you're making a damn fool of yourself. Knock it off, Solana." Without his father there, it left him in a predicament. To rebuke his own family, here as guests in their home, would be unconscionable, but Melondi and her friends were guests as well. As badly as he wanted to chastise Solana for her behaviour, it risked questions that he didn't want to answer or didn't know the answers to. Until he had some kind of commitment from Melondi, from Kalira, he knew he was walking a very thin line. He had to protect them both, but his silence was the only way to do that. He was certain of his feelings for Melondi, even certain that he would face what that meant for her life as Kalira Tasu. But until she proposed to him, he was left floating in dark waters. It had often been there, lurking in the back of his mind. What if she changed her mind? What if she decided he was too low-born for her? Goddess, what if the Empress herself simply forbade their relationship? Goddess, what if the Empress herself simply forbade their relationship? While all those questions and many others often wandered through his mind, they had never been so frustrating as right now. But that didn't make those questions any less real. Vadim felt a surge of frustration rise from deep within him. It was a desperate longing to escape the suffocating grip of Solana's dramatics, and he wanted to scream, to shout at her to stop, but the words died on his lips as he realized the futility of trying. He could not announce to his family that he was with Melondi and to stop being such a tart, when Melondi Sandoka wasn't actually a person. She was a myth, a fabrication. Melondi was nothing more than a cover story for a woman who could drop him in an instant, even if he was certain she would not. Nor could he tell Solana she was at serious risk of landing herself in deep trouble by insulting an imperial princess. As much as he detested the situation, while Melondi remained mute, her secret wasn't his to give away. And like it or not, Melondi never flinched, which only seemed to embolden her as the morning went by. Perhaps it was her training, and Riala had taken her aside for a brief conversation that resulted in a real reprieve, thank the goddess. But through it all, Mel never acknowledged Solana's words. At least, until they were settled around their table for lunch. The adults were over at another table minding Joshua, Cassandra, and Lagos when Solana said, "Why not get some mint with your lunch? You're throwing yourself at him like some pathetic animal in heat." "Solana, that's enough," he whispered harshly. "You're family and a guest, and we've tried to ignore you, but you're abusing Melondi as my guest and me as your host. Apologize right now, before I speak with your mother." Solana's barb was as wicked as any of the others, but Vadim felt Melondi's grip on his hand close like a vice. It hurt, and when he looked into her eyes, there was a murderous fury he'd never seen before. Whatever she was going to say, surely... "And we're done here." Desi swooped in, frantically slipping her arm around Melondi and prying her away.
Time to get to Orinka Stadium. Father, Lady Dasari, ladies, Mr. Brelak, it's been a lot of fun, but we can't be late.
Hey, yeah! Hannah slipped in close and laughed uncertainly.
You all have fun. I wish I was going too, but you know how it is. How about I give Riala a break and Vadim spend some time with Levi and the kids? Nothing to worry about here.
Vadim looked at his would-be girlfriend, the woman he wanted to be with, and realized how close to the edge she was. She had the power to destroy his entire family, to destroy their relationship with one another, and everything hung in the balance over Solana being such an unthinkable idiot. He knew that Solana thought she was talking down to a woman she saw as beneath him, and yes, there was clearly spite involved, but how could he ever blame Melondi for ending things then and there? In his heart, he knew he could not. He never played the games of station, knowing that he enjoyed the barest relationship to minor nobility. Who would want to be saddled with such a relative?
I think that's a fine idea, don't you, Mara?
Despite her lithe build, one of the twins practically body-checked her way between Melondi and Solana, who stood almost sneering a few feet away. Her sister swooped in a moment later, blocking the two from seeing one another.
Absolutely. Would you just look at the time? We can't be late. Mel,
Desi said quietly, as she took her friend's hand and removed it from his.
It's time to go.
Melondi looked at Desi, before looking at him once more. The expression on her face was raw anger in a way that he'd never seen before. He didn't know if she was as frustrated by their secret as he was, or if she was casting him away. It made him want to weep, but he nodded once, hoping she would understand. And then they were gone. Having gone their separate ways, Zinshiki made her way to a small park near Duchess Eliana's estate. The park was convenient for meeting her sisters, the weather was cold for the Shulvanti, and their privacy was assured.
So, we're doing crimes now?
She asked flatly. Cool or not, the morning was damp. She didn't like the damp.
Will your hackacks approve?
Raikishi asked cheerfully, and shrugged off Zinshiki's grimace.
It's a fair question, even if Patviri is doing the asking, you know. Mine doesn't fully understand the bonds and traditions of a hakakt, but he's good with it,
Patviri said briefly. She was asking the favour, however reluctantly.
It was his job, but I asked to do it.
Zinshiki became aware that her three sisters were looking at her. They waited. She let them wait. They waited more.
Mine may not, but he talks about karma,
she said, expecting the blank stares that earned.
It's like Rakokt Kav Pashas. As long as our victim is a villain, he will be fine with it.
And as long as they were not caught. That went without saying, since it would be humiliating if they couldn't get the job done. Of course, while she owed Patviri for that business with Solana Dasari, the same could not be said of her sisters. It was Patviri asking for a favour, so negotiations were necessary.
Is she? Asked Raikishi. A villain, I mean. You know I don't like framing innocent people. It's bad business. She fixes the Darvik races and is in trouble with a gangster.
Patviri's Asayak gave a first-degree twitch of affirmation.
She isn't innocent. I'm good with that.
Zinshiki watched as Raikishi nodded happily, as well she should. Her sister was their future pathfinder, and she made a habit of acquiring favours she could use later on. As long as she had an understanding with Patviri up front, Raikishi's reluctance vanished, leaving her usual bouncy self.
I don't know. Asen? Really?
Kayla shook her head slowly.
I mean, I get doing it during the day, because this Bogosi woman won't be home. No risk of a murder. People start looking once there's a body, but why are we doing this at all? I didn't sign up to your hahat just to get my tail in a twist, and some animal doctor isn't likely to have a lot of stuff we can pillage before we burn the place. What's in this for me?
It was Pat Vera's problem if Kalis wanted to play hardball, and Zinchiki steeled her aside into a pose of first-degree neutrality with third-degree indifference.
I'll buy you dinner, all expenses paid.
Pat Vera's eyes narrowed to slits.
Kalis crossed her arms. 5 dinners. 2. 4.
3, Pat Vera said firmly, but modified the order at Kalis's lack of acceptance.
3 with drinks. I'm in.
Kalis's smile showed a hint of teeth.
You're missing the important point. This is to establish myself in my hakak's eyes,
Pat Vera said reluctantly. It was admitting a weakness, and she hated that.
I owe my hakak a life debt.
If Rikishi said nothing, that was probably best. Having accrued the favour, she wasn't one to gloat. Kalis was an outstanding shot, and entirely ready to kill anyone who stood in her way. The option to pillage someone's home before burning it to the ground posed few difficulties for her. She was clearly getting soft.
Well, this is Pat Vera's job. The odds are remote that it will impress our prospective husband, who is a cook, a bartender, and a covert agent specializing in adult entertainment. The two of you should be asking the hard question,
Zinchiki said flatly, setting things into their proper order.
Will this get us laid?
Pat Vera grumbled inside as they drove toward the home of Lilu Bagosi, the celebrity animal doctor. While the woman had parlayed her video presence into expanding her clinic, she also had a major interest in an entertainment park outside the city. For the woman to live in the area she did was incongruous. The area of Tamaktori was affluent but not rich. Either Bagosi was still moving up, or she lacked real money. If it was the former, good. There would be things to steal. If it was the latter, her younger 2 sisters would not be happy, expanding the size of her debt to them.
Humans. And why couldn't I just get stabbed like Zinchiki? No, I had to go do it the hard way. I'm starting to think my human is cursed,
she muttered, to none of her sisters in particular. She was surprised anyone answered, but more so that it was Zinchiki.
Because they're the only beings better than Pezrin at being caught in a storm of flying bullets.
Zinchiki's tone was flat as ever and subject to a world of interpretation, which was usually how her sister liked it. Still, there wasn't a knife in the words, or at least not yet.
Yeah, there is that, Pat Vera shrugged. Mine tends to hold a grudge. Mine teaches war crimes.
For a wonder, her sister turned to face her.
Haven't you wondered how, whenever there's a catastrophe, presuming they didn't start it, that humans are always running toward it? The only irritating thing about my hahakt is when he questions how he ended up there. What about your Gexpalt, the princess?
Rikishi spoke up. Zinchiki was about to set her aside in second-degree rebuke when she saw the thoughtful look on Rikishi's face.
What do you mean?
Rikishi started twirling a lock of hair, an unconscious habit when she was lost in thought.
She's convinced that her sister wants her dead, right?
I'm convinced, Zinchiki said. It was, she felt, an eloquent level of support.
I've wanted you dead for ages, but it hasn't happened,
Pat Vera pointed out, though her Asaic showed first-degree amusement.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's weird, right? She survived a direct attack on her life by an admiral with a gun, and that near miss on the highway was number 2. Then there was the thing with the poisoning. That kind of counts as free, and that's only the attempts you know about. She survived,
Zinchiki replied. It was self-evident, and she wondered where her sister was going with this.
Why use someone so shoddy? Rikishi said doubtfully. I mean, How many people do you know that have survived more than one assassination attempt? Much less 3. None. Eliminate Camordry, and she should be safe.
But that was a thought for another time. They had arrived. After returning home from an early business appointment, Duchess Trinia de Caron deemed the morning a success. After all, she had chosen well. Once her initial plans came to fruition, she began making certain preparations for her future. One had been discreetly acquiring the identities of useful yet disposable individuals. Given her clearance in the interior, that would have been a fairly straightforward prospect, but you could never leave a digital trail. Not with Lorem Raylin. She briefly wondered how frustrated her old mentor was at this moment. The operative had called, said the job was complete, and that was that. When she asked if there was any evidence, the woman replied that there might be confirmation of the deaths, but she wouldn't recommend diving for it. The real shame had been the timing of killing off Bradoon. Camordry seemed to have embarked on an inexplicable vendetta to kill Kalira. In hindsight, her success would have been invaluable, but she'd only managed to fail in a spectacular fashion. Her contract with the assassin had been for Satora and Camordry's deaths, and she performed admirably. Offering another hit on Kalira would have been a dangerous variable, completely unrealistic, and would have posed far too many risks. Not that she harboured thoughts of killing Kalira, but now the girl had all but come out in public, and with conspicuous success. This would need careful planning, but she was good at that. Having worked her way into a position within the Family Support Division of the Interior, she would have been satisfied with succeeding Raylin as Minister of the Interior. Winning the love of her charge and her subsequent marriage to Prince Lorau Tassu had offered so much more. Lorem Raylin stepped out of her vehicle and considered the colour. Travelling on official business, it had adopted the colours of the interior. Inconsequential. Traffic was routed around her wherever she went. Gripped by the dreary winter weather, the roads out to Akratori presented no challenge, and she swiftly arrived at her destination, the amazing Animal Imperium and Sea Preserve. Princess Camordry had dismissed her security detail the evening before, but that only granted so much distance. While Her Highness had been explicit, when her limousine failed to leave, the call had gone out from the Northern Palace. Agents had been summoned. The caretaker there to feed the animals had been questioned on her arrival. Despite the annoying omnispam that permeated the district, the amazing Imperium's security servers were free from the plague. Staff was summoned, which led to a pointed discussion over shutting down the omnispam, as well as cursory questions regarding Aunt Lilu's dancing Grinshaw. Both lines of inquiry were met with reluctance by employees. Park technicians remained concerned about losing data, and bleated for the park's owners. Coupled to the park's obnoxiously cloying theme music, the non-stop assault of advertising was giving her a splitting headache. Hours later, in the presence of a battery of attorneys and one Lilu Bagosi, the annoyance was dealt with, which only led to other issues. While not linked to the main servers, video from the Seaquarium tank of Smoochie the Hawk vividly revealed the scene. Scattered remains of the princess and her new secretary were discovered about the bottom. The secretary, one Essin Tarvi, was a strong candidate for questioning in the wake of the mint incident reported by Agent Davari. After isolating the Hawk in its holding area, a team of constabulary divers recovered the remains of one Pavis Clips Cosreem from the bottom. The Akratori medical examiner ruled drowning as the official cause of death, while noting extensive bruising of a sexual nature. Contact with Cosreem's next of kin met with negligible interest except for tentative queries about a wrongful death suit. Interest dimmed abruptly after a lawyer for the Amazing Animal Imperium mentioned interior interest. Those same lawyers were now busily discussing the option of repatriating the hawk back to its native ecosystem, despite Lilu Bagos's outrage at the expense. That outrage dimmed rather quickly after dispatching her hunters to poke through the network, noting a text message buried in the buffer over an employee being bitten while performing a nosedive job on a particularly reluctant pouchadillo. It had taken only a moment to order an investigation into the financial records of the Amazing Animal Imperium, and Lilu Bagosi in particular. Files had already been dispatched to waiting forensic accountants. The Akratory District Council cautiously emerged to take an interest in the flurry of activity around the park. Irritating. A late night had now become mid-morning. Raylin dismissed the council, stating that the park would likely be closed. Any hopes for the park's redevelopment were dashed, as she noted the escape of several endangered green-nosed pouchadillos. Akratory Point would have to be permanently designated as a wilderness preserve. Occasionally, her position had its perks. As for Princess Kamordri Tassu, Her Highness was emphatically dead. Palace relations had been called in. Initial indications were that the death would be revealed to the public as an unfortunate accident when Her Highness took a dramatic interest in preserving the Imperium's endangered wildlife, doubtless stirred by the prior evening's address, rather than dubious triple homicide by alien fish. All of which failed to mention the presence of one other figure, who successfully evaded most, but not all, of the park's security cameras. No, that would remain on Raylin's shortlist for closed investigation. In the midst of their collective grief over the death of Princess Kalandri, the death of Lady Aurelea had been a public tragedy. The murder of her daughter, Princess Satora, has shocked the Imperium, all too aware that their beloved Empress would face these double blows, without warning, on her return to Shill. Now, someone had deftly arranged the death of Her Highness, Princess Kamordri Tassu, sparing Raylin the trouble. She still had the rest of the family to care for. Impermissible. It would not do.
I can't believe he stayed.
Desi watched as Melondi crossed her arms and scowled.
Well, what did you expect him to do? With his father working at the restaurant, he has to play host today. He couldn't ditch Lady Phrysis and the McClendons, even if Solana was being less than delicate.
The euphemism got her a look, but it seemed more in keeping with present company than to call Solana names. Desi pressed on.
He couldn't very well say, I want to spend my time with Melondi by royal command now, could he?
You're right. You're right. I know you're right.
Melondi looked at all of them before burying her face in her hands.
It's just a few more days, but Mint?
I swear to Helle that I could have just clawed her to pieces on the spot. No, they were never going to speak of last night ever again, but the comment about Mint had been a very near miss. Solana Dasari had no idea at all how lucky she was.
Never a Pezrin when you need one.
Melondi's mouth quivered once before she snickered. Everyone relaxed as her beloved friend visibly returned to her old self. It was probably a blessing in disguise that they hadn't had Hakak's sister along this morning. Honor-bound and homicidal, there was no telling what Zinshiki might have done. At least, she wasn't getting into trouble.